Hello, John.
Hello, Oliver.
And today we're going to talk about Google. There's been lots of protests outside Google by Gemma O'Doherty and quite a few other people. But first of all, I'll just go through the technology of Google. Google basically earns its money through what's called Google AdWords. Now, the Google AdWords brings in billions and billions to Google every year. But the problem with internet advertising is it's now in decline. It's not as great as it was. So eventually Google is going to run into a few problems, possibly like Nokia and Kodak, where it won't move with the times, and it needs to move with the times. And I think it particularly needs to address people like Gemma O'Doherty, that's protesting. She's pointing out what she sees as wrong, and if you look at things like Project Veritas, also, you know, that they're pointing out things. So you were saying anyway, that Google is a very young company and it's like a teenager.
Well, it's established, as far as I know, it's been established 20 years or 15 years.
About 15, yeah.
15, which is very recent establishment. Oftentimes it takes years for a company to grow to the extent that Google is at now. And so therefore, they've grown very, very fast from very humble beginnings. And now they're practically worldwide and a huge operation, making billions of pounds, billions of dollars or euros profit, and with a big company in this country of Ireland. So employing a lot of people now. But there have been, because they're a young company, they haven't got the track record that a company of that size and that turnover would need.
I think if you look at Google, if you compare Kodak, if you look at Nokia, both companies are well over 100 years. You know, they had practices and procedures that they learned over time from different generations, and it grew as a mature company. Google is a very, very young company, and not only that, but it's a massive wealth, probably about up to 100 billion a year it makes. Its weakness is the one product, which is Google AdWords. That's where it makes most of its revenue, and that's where the danger is for Google. But when you see people like Gemma O'Doherty outside Google, I think my opinion would be that they should listen to people like Gemma O'Doherty. And what would you think of maybe Google employing someone like Gemma O'Doherty as a national ambassador for Google, and maybe have a national ambassador in each country to represent the interests of the country in regards to Google?
Exactly. Well, it would be, because it's such a young company and with such a number of employees, it mightn't have a philosophy. It has a secular type of an agenda, as far as one can see. But a lot of people use their facilities by way of seeking information, and by way of they also go on YouTube. So people use these services and find them very helpful and satisfactory in what they're at. But because they're such a young company, they need to have, I think, the sort of mature staff that can kind of steady the ship. It's, in some ways, it's a young ship without, in many ways, the sort of sober, prudent management that a company of that size and turnover needs. For example, it would appear to me to be a secular type of organisation, and it doesn't include in their operation a religious sensibility. In other words, in the world there are over 1 billion Catholics, there are millions of Christians of other denominations, and then there are over 1 billion Muslim religious and people that practice that religion. So Google, being an organisation that's used by all these people, would need to take account of that, in my book, and have a respect for the different religions in the world, that try to live according to certain principles, which doesn't involve a secular way of life. I think for a company of that size and influence, I think it would be very prudent, along the lines that you suggested, that the advice from the like of a person like Jim O'Doherty, a person of that calibre, with strong faith in the Catholic faith. There's also people that have the Muslim faith and are fairly convinced of the value of their religion, and one can only observe the very respectable way that they go about and attend to their religious duties. Men, women and younger people, they are dressed very soberly and very respectably for what they're at. It would reminds me, when I see them, it reminds me of the way in this country, perhaps 30, 40 years ago, when I was younger, the same sort of respect was involved, and the churches were, generally speaking, packed, and people were dressed respectably for that, going to Mass on a Sunday. For example, you were obliged to polish your shoes. So this is the sort of respect that I think a company of the calibre of Google, which after all have customers that practice the Catholic faith, the Christian faith in different denominations, the Muslim faith, so it would be very prudent for them to sort of reflect that in their operation.
So, should Google invite religious leaders to have an input in artificial intelligence?
Well, you see, what do you mean by artificial intelligence?
Well, for example, we done a rosary video and Google tried to figure out what you were actually saying on the YouTube video, and it put in its own subtitles, and you alerted me to that and I had to stop it. So artificial intelligence is, for example, the Siri Apple voice assistant. You talk to it, you ask if you want a pizza, whatever you want, you tell Siri your problems and it comes back with an answer. That's artificial intelligence.
Who do you tell your problem?
Well, in Apple it would be Siri. Yeah, you'd be talking to your voice assistant, right? Either through your phone or your computer. Microsoft has its own version of it, Cortana, I think it's called. And basically, you're talking to the computer and you're asking the computer for advice of your problems. Now, the problem with that is that artificial intelligence, as it stands now, is secular. So it doesn't it's not, and you don't have a religious input. So my question to you is, in that context, should Google invite religious leaders to have an input in artificial intelligence?
Well, they should, and aside from that, they should have consultation with people of that calibre, so as they've got the balance right. Because, for example, we know the younger people, younger folk, use that type of situation far more than older folk, because we weren't brought up with that system when we were starting out. Young people now are brought up with that system and don't engage in personal conversations with their peers. It's mostly on this through their telephone, through their mobile phones and their other issues, and so they're using computers for a variety of reasons, and an iPhone. So this business of being able to speak to the computer or speak to your phone and the computer, the same thing, and perhaps ask personal questions. For example, young people might have difficulty with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, as the case might be, and it seems that they're liable to ask the computer or the Google or whichever.
The voice assistant, yeah.
Voice assistants about what should they do if the person is unfaithful or is not behaving properly, and they might ask the computer, so they will get a secular type answer. They will not get a spiritual answer that would be in keeping with good advice that you will get from a person.
Or they might ask, Siri, should I have an abortion?
Correct, and there's voices that don't support that view, that if you have, and the phrase is often used, is unwanted pregnancies. Well, you can't have an unwanted pregnancy unless you have intercourse. So if you have that, the chances are you could be pregnant. And people now, even though they have all these contraceptive items that are supposed to solve this problem, there appears to be between abortions and children born to women that are not married as such in a stable environment. So there's a lot of problems in that area, and to call abortion a health alternative is a misnomer, and because it means it's a life extinguished, a potential life, and that's the real nub of the thing. So a person asking that question of the computer is going to get a secular type answer, which is not the sort of an answer that you will get if you ask a person that has a spiritual content to their answer. So this is something that Google and Apple and all these ones that have this, what they call artificial intelligence, in other words, asking the computer the questions, they need to sort of be very careful about that, because if this thing continues, where's the world's population going to go? Is it that there are influential people in the world want to limit the population of the world and doing it this way, but not coming out and telling the truth about what their agenda is? Because there's been quite a number of children aborted every day in countries throughout the world, and it can't be considered a good thing for the fact that there's potential citizens lost, and then the effects that it might have health-wise on the women that have these abortions. So it would be very prudent for the like of Google and Apple and these other companies to weigh that up and to seek other advice other than the secular agenda.
So I suppose in summary, Google is, as we said, it's a young company. It should really have a national ambassador in every country to protect the interests on a national level of the country on the Google platform. And it should really invite the religious leaders of the world's religions to give it advice and to cooperate.
And to sort of, when this artificial intelligence, when a person asks advice, it would be prudent for them to sort of say, well, do you practice religion? Because if you do, then the answer has to take that into account. If you don't practice any religion, believe in anything, well then that's another situation. But companies like Google and Apple and these influential companies, they want to be very careful about the sort of advice that they would offer, and to personal situations like that, and have a religious content involved as well, not just the secular, because not everybody supports the secular agenda. Quite a few don't, and even ones that do support it, if they thought long and hard about it, it doesn't provide that much for people. They're not providing much health care for people in developing countries. It's Christians and Muslims that are providing that for people in countries where there's a need for poor people and people, all the rest of it. They're not providing too much charitable institutions throughout the world to aid the less well-off. It's Christian and Christian organisations that's doing that. So Google and Apple would want to consider those items.
Absolutely.
That is you know, who's providing the services in health and hospitals and education throughout the developed world where there's a strong need for it. It's Christian organisations, Christian charities, and all the rest of it. So you know, the secular, they're not providing too much for anyone.
That's it.
Except for themselves.
So maybe John Malone will become the leader of Google, as an elder and he'll sort out their problems.
Well, it would be nice that if there was people that had sort of Christian views and perhaps lay people
And a life experience.
and life experience, because this is the sort of assets that you bring as you grow older, particularly if you've been in business. If you've been in a very sheltered type of environment, for example, a civil service in various countries, you're not experiencing the same ups and downs that you do in business, because they often used to say in America, you need to fail about twice before you make a success in the third time. So it's first and second goes alike and the third takes a bite. So you have to weigh that up.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much, Oliver.